And, well, as RT has reported in the past, the Department of Homeland Security is conducting surveillance on peaceful protest groups like Occupy Wall Street. Yesterday, the advocacy group Partnership for Civil Justice Fund released new documents that show the surveillance. Here's a snippet from the fall of 2011. Good morning. Please send me an update on the Occupy movement in your respective regions by 11:30 EST. The director is extremely interested in the movement and how it may affect federal facilities. So just who isn't the Department of Homeland Security spying on these days? DHS is saying that it has every right to keep track of peaceful demonstrators like those involved in Occupy Wall Street. But critics say that it's an abuse of their power. The whole purpose of the creation of DHS was to consolidate different government departments who fight terrorism in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Now, according to the documents, it turns out DHS has been spying on peaceful, law-abiding citizens since 2006. And they say, well, it's perfectly legal. To discuss this and more, Michael Brooks, a producer from The Majority Report, joins me in studio in New York. Michael, hello.
Hi, Margaret.
Hey
good
there.
to be with you.
So these documents seem to reinforce all the accounts of law enforcement targeting activists. You know, coincidentally, DHS Secretary Janet Napolitano just yesterday, well, she wrote a blog post concerning privacy and civil liberties saying, quote, "The department has implemented strong privacy and civil rights and civil liberty standards in all its cybersecurity programs and initiatives from the outset in order to protect privacy while safeguarding and securing cyberspace." You know, so Michael, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think that in some respects, you know, President Obama, if we go back to 2008 and 2007, he actually campaigned very aggressively on restoring civil liberties. And obviously, in a lot of ways, he simply hasn't done that. I think, you know, he's moderated in certain areas and not in others. But instead, what you've seen this administration do is build off of a lot of the previous administration's programs and then try to build some rules around them so that there's a certain type of accountability within them.
Sure. So what kind of
that's very late in the game.
What kind of precedent do you think that this is going to set? You know, do you think that they're going to have this chilling effect when it comes to activists trying to organize and have their voices heard?
Well, I think absolutely, because I think what this document shows is just the notion that by participating in very, very basic kind of democratic assembly, you might be monitored in an uncomfortable way, and that's obviously frightening and unappealing to most people. I think also it's worth noting that there is some real asymmetry here. You know, you had the Tea Party movement, you know, kind of catch fire in 2009. And people use some very incendiary and disturbing and at times just bizarre rhetoric. And those people were not monitored in the same way as people in the Occupy movement. So I think there's an asymmetry, and of course there's bound to be some chilling effect, absolutely.
I see. So Michael, you know, has this idea of surveillance, the idea that this agency, you know, agencies like DHS, that they're keeping tabs on citizens, is this just par for the course, Michael?
Well, I think, you know, the technology in some ways does make it par for the course. I mean, we're all kind of, and many of us are kind of making our lives more and more transparent through social media, through technology, and then government and different agencies and the corporate sector has a much easier ability to kind of track and aggregate us. And I think that obviously the laws and the legal frameworks and the new norms that we're going to need to have are way behind, and so it's a really, really precarious situation. We're just not, we're too far behind our technology and our politics and legally and, you know, in our culture, I think.
So certainly, Michael, so I want to talk to you about this idea of fusion centers. You know, it keeps popping up. A lot of information being gathered, you know, compiled by these fusion centers. They've been described as hubs where massive amounts of data is being collected and analyzed. What will we see the role of these fusion centers? Are they going to become more central in fighting terror?
Well, I think that they already are. You know, this kind of concept has been around for a little while in the intelligence community and in responses to 9/11. And I think that there are a couple of things we need to kind of disaggregate here. It is important to keep in mind, even with all of the confusion and all of the nonsense and all of the abuse, that as you kind of indicate by your question, there still is some legitimate threats and things to be monitored with regards to things like terrorism. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is this kind of broad overreach and, in many cases, abuse of civil liberties and monitoring. And the third thing, which I think you'll see a lot in fusion centers, private companies, private intelligence agencies play a large role in them. And you're going to just see a lot of really just another version of corporate welfare. A lot of people probably with pseudo-expertise pushing junky ideas, really sort of pseudo-studies, pseudo-intelligence, justifying their own budgets, their own salaries, their own, in some cases like chauffeured SUVs, so that they can still, really just have benefits flowing to them. And they're not, in the process of abusing civil liberties, they're really providing very little upside. So I think that there's a kind of corporate welfare component to all of this stuff that we really need to look at as well, because at the end of the day, all of these things, the military, the Pentagon, obviously parts of it are very necessary and vital, and then there are aspects of it which abuse and overreach on civil liberties, and then there's also just massive inefficiencies and misallotment of resources and things like that. So I think you see that very clearly in the fusion centers.
Michael, I want to take you back to Janet Napolitano's blog, where she essentially was saying that we have these strong privacy standards that we're holding up. What is she talking about?
Well, we don't know, right? And that's part of the irony. The administration's released some guidelines, and everybody's going to claim that they're working under the highest and cleanest of standards. The problem is that just as our lives become more and more clear and transparent to agencies, their transparency shrinks to the general public. So we don't really know.
Certainly, Michael, and come to find out, we've been told that DHS has been spying on law-abiding citizens since 2006. So not really clear on those standards.
Yeah, no, obviously. I mean, I think clearly, and there's many cases of people engaging in nonviolent action, in worst cases being harassed, and even in cases where there was no adverse consequence, the very notion, like you're saying, that someone going out, peacefully demonstrating, peacefully highlighting some really basic and obvious issues about contemporary American life, which in the case of the Occupy movement is the, corruption in the financial sector, skyrocketing
Certainly, Michael,
inequality.
I hate to cut you off there.
Yeah,
Thank
please.
you for your time. That was Michael Brooks. He's a producer for the Majority Report.
Thank you so much.
Sure.